We often live as if our intellect and effort are the only things keeping us from ruin. We push, we plan, and we try to force outcomes, operating under the assumption that the world will eventually yield to our will if we just struggle hard enough. This drive for control is visible at the very start of the human story. Just outside the gates of Eden, the brothers Cain and Abel established two different ways of approaching the Creator. Cain worked the soil, battling thorns and weeds to produce a harvest. When he brought an offering to God, he treated it as a transaction. He had put in the labor, and he believed that work entitled him to a blessing. While God accepted Abel's offering, he rejected Cain's half-hearted attempt. But he gave Cain a clear map of the choice ahead, a warning that sin was crouching at his door, and a direct instruction that he must master his own resentment before it consumed him. Cain refused to yield his pride. He took Abel into a field and murdered him, choosing violence to physically eliminate an obstacle he couldn't outwork. The consequence struck the one thing Cain valued, his productivity. He was cursed to lose the very land he tried to dominate, forced away from his fields to become a permanent wanderer. When we try to manufacture our own destiny through force, we don't gain control, we lose it, ending up isolated and exhausted by the very things we tried to build. If violence fails, the human impulse is to pivot to deception. We see this in Jacob, a man whose early life was a series of hustles, exploiting his brother's hunger and wearing a disguise to trick his father into giving him the family blessing. Jacob's scheming eventually forced him into exile, where he met his match in his uncle Laban. He spent 14 years in grueling labor, only to be tricked and manipulated by a man even more cunning than himself. This image captures the reality of that exhausting labor. For decades, Jacob lived among these cliffs, watching Laban change his wages 10 different times. In a desperate, superstitious attempt to secure his wealth, Jacob even tried to manipulate the genetics of his sheep by peeling bark off tree branches. Jacob was striving for things that had already been promised to him. Years earlier, in a dream at Bethel, God had guaranteed him the land and the blessing unconditionally. Jacob was working himself to the bone to steal what he was supposed to receive as a gift. His life became a cycle of retaliation and anxiety, proving that human cunning cannot manufacture a blessing that is meant to be received through faith. These ancient fragments contain a perspective that contrasts the ground-level struggle of Cain and Jacob. They reveal a timeline given to the prophet Daniel in Babylon, a schedule of events that does not depend on human effort. This is a visualization of the 70-week prophecy. In this system, 1 week equals 7 years, creating a precise 490-year countdown clock for the arrival of the Messiah. The clock began on a specific day, March 14th, 445 BC. That was the day a Persian king issued the official decree to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. The prophecy stated it would take 69 weeks, or 483 years, for the leader to appear. Using the 360-day biblical year, that calculation equals exactly 173,880 days. 173,880 days after the Persian decree brings us to April 6, 32 AD. That was the day Jesus of Nazareth rode into Jerusalem, fulfilling the prophecy to the day. Redemption arrived on a schedule set centuries before its fulfillment, ignoring every variable of human failure and interference. The count held firm. Cain killed to secure his destiny, and Jacob lied to secure his. But Daniel's calculations suggest that the most significant events in human history were already on the calendar, moving forward regardless of human striving. However, there is a gap in the timeline. After the Messiah was rejected and cut off, the clock paused at the 69th week. This created what we call a prophetic gap. The impact of missing that prophesied window is carved into this stone relief. It shows Roman soldiers carrying the menorah out of Jerusalem in 70 AD, marking the total destruction of the temple and the city. We are currently living in this paused window of time, an era of grace that exists before the final 7-year countdown resumes. This leaves us with the same choice Cain faced at his door. We can choose to harbor jealousy and aggressively force our own outcomes, or we can look at the precision of the timeline and realize we aren't the ones in control. Cain and Jacob showed that muscling or scheming our way to the top leads only to exhaustion. Lasting peace is found in the alternative, yielding our efforts to a grace that has been on schedule since the foundation of the world.